all the introductory remarks. I first would like to thank, and I hope that EBCD and Elias could allow me to start by thanking the presence of our Vice President, Yunus Omarji, for being here. Thank you so much. It's a huge pleasure and an honor to count your presence here with us, and especially because of your role, because of your commitment with islands and outermost regions, and because of all that you are doing to defend the specificities and the regions and all that is needed to comply with the principle of subsidiarity, of turning the European Union as a European Union of regions and to respect the diversity of regions and islands and territories that the European Union has. So thank you so much for your work and for your availability to be here with us. Also to thank the European Bureau for Conservation and Development, EBCD, for co-organizing today's event, for its long-standing commitment to bring together policymakers, researchers, and practitioners to advance Europe's environmental agenda. It's of course also a big pleasure to have you all here participating on this important event and this important exchange to know how we can move from nature conservation on the ground to concrete European policy and strategic investment for the EU's overseas regions and islands. Some 70 million people live on around 4,000 islands across the EU, while 95 million people, 1/5 of the EU population, live along EU coastlines across 22 member states. The insularity, remoteness, and vulnerability to climate and environmental pressures have historically led to higher transport costs, connectivity gaps, demographic challenges, and reduced access to services and opportunities compared to the mainland. At the same time, and this is quite important, and welcome the participants that are arriving, at the same time, their territorial specificities, cultural heritage, and natural environment offer significant and diverse opportunities. And I believe that this is why the European Commission has presented on June this month, its first ever tailor-made strategies dedicated to support both types of territories and unlock their potential. The strategy proposes to boost entrepreneurship, diversify local economies, sustainable tourism and digitalization, and tackle connectivity gaps and accelerate decarbonization, renewable energy, climate adaptation, biodiversity protection. These are the core issues of the LIFE program. The strategy promotes also regular dialogue between EU institutions and representatives for the interests of islands, and this, we believe, must go hand in hand with stronger recognition of the specific challenges faced by islands, outermost regions, particularly its environmental vulnerability, climate exposure, and the need for sustained investment to turn ecological potential into long-term resilience. We meet here at a critical moment. As the European Union prepares the next multi-annual financial framework, 2028-2034, we are not only discussing budget lines, we are defining the Union's capacity to deliver on its climate and biodiversity commitments and to ensure that these commitments are anchored in the territories where some of the world's most valuable ecosystems are found, but also most vulnerable. And in this case, I have to say that we are having a huge discussion, even in our group, about the future of LIFE program. And it's quite important to say that for us, LIFE program is unnegotiable. We cannot quit and cannot end this important program that are producing so many good results for our territories, for our islands, for outermost regions. And they are, I usually say, the concrete example of reaching or turning the European Union more closer to the citizens. This is subsidiarity. This is what they have a direct link with the Commission, direct link with the projects, and the real impact of their projects on the realities of their communities. So this is why LIFE program, even if it has some adaptations or some changes, are for us, at least for me, negotiable, and we want to continue to have these kind of instruments to support these climate goals, climate transition, and to help to support also vulnerable regions, areas, islands that are more affected by the climate transition and also the climatic extreme events. At the same time, we must recognize the growing policy coherence emerging at EU level, including the new EU strategy for islands, which provides an important opportunity to better integrate island territories into European policies on climate, energy, biodiversity, and sustainable development. And this must be fully aligned with the specific realities of also the outermost regions, ensuring that islands are no longer treated as peripheral, but as strategic assets in European projects. And I cannot stop of reminding that a recent study referred that 80% of the total European biodiversity lies on the outermost regions. So we cannot ignore that. So in this context, initiatives such as Best Life 2030 demonstrate what is possible when European ambition is matched with locally led implementation. Across 6 global regions, this program shows the biodiversity protection is most effective when rooted in local communities, supported by science, and backed by flexible and accessible financing. And this is also a principle that we are trying to do for the next MFF, the simplification and have a more democratic access to the European funds and policies. What we have right now is we are making a selection and creating some difficulties for the Europeans to have access to the important funds like Horizon Europe, Competitiveness Fund, for the Future Competitiveness Fund. And we cannot make this selection based on administrative burden or bureaucracy. We have to make the selection based on the quality of the projects. And this is why we need to simplify this access to the financing, the European financing. It is not only preserving ecosystems, it is strengthening capacity, empowering local actors, and delivering measurable environmental and social economic benefits. This is why today's discussion is so timely. It is about closing the gap between policy ambition in Brussels and implementation capacity in our regions, in our islands, in our outermost regions. It's also about ensuring that the next EU budget reflects not only priorities, but realities on the ground. Sorry for taking so much time, but I have to say one thing that I usually say in my electoral circumscription. In some cases, it looks like the decisions made in the offices of the Commission or even in other European institutions like the Parliament don't take into account the realities of the impact of these decisions. That we are having some bad examples that we decided things that created more negative impacts than the ones that were positive expected. So this is why we need to guarantee that all the decisions have impact assessments and are based on the dialogue with the local actors. To conclude, the outermost regions of the Azores and Madeira are also living examples of how Europe extends into Atlantic and has a space of extraordinary natural value and strategic importance. They are guardians of unique marine and terrestrial ecosystems, key contributors to ocean governance, and laboratories for sustainable development in islands contexts. Just for you to know, the Azores have designated the largest marine protected area network in the North Atlantic, covering roughly 300,000 square kilometers and representing around 30% of all Azorean waters. This network was designed through more than 40 rounds of community engagement involving fishers, tourism operators, scientists, other stakeholders, in a clear example of how conservation and local ownership can go hand in hand. And this is quite important. We need to guarantee that all the stakeholders, all the persons involved in these decisions are taking into account, are on board, because even it's not the best decision for all, they understand that they will comply, they will help us to implement these decisions. And the message is clear. Protecting biodiversity is not separate from economic development. It is its foundation for us, and no one can be left behind in our transitions. So let us use this moment to ensure that leadership on nature conservation is fully translated into leadership in policy, financing, and also long-term commitment. Thank you so much for today. Thank you so much. Now I will pass the floor. It's a great honor to pass the floor to our Vice President, MEP Yunus Amarji. The floor is yours, please.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, dear Paulo. So first of all, let me greet you and let me thank you for your commitment. And dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, I just wanted to reassure you, we are fighting the fight together for the outermost regions. Whatever the political family we belong to, we are united in our action. We've got a united action between the MEPs coming from the OCTs and from the ultra-peripheral regions. I think this is really a precious collaboration. This is the fourth time that I sit here in the European Parliament, and I can tell you that the fact that our outermost regions are taken into account in European debate now, but it was not always so. I saw a difference between my different mandates when I came here to the European Parliament in 2012. The outermost regions were just a marginal concern. And there was a vision about these outermost regions, but you know, those regions were considered as very poor regions, and that's all that they were about. Today, everybody agrees on the fact that the outermost regions must be back at the core of the EU's priorities, because you have a lot of challenges for the EU that are concentrated there. Paolo and I were in Cyprus a couple of days ago for a meeting on islands, and we saw at that event that in our geopolitical times, there is increased awareness of the fact that the outermost regions must be placed at the heart of our priorities for geopolitical reasons, for European geopolitical, but also for global geopolitical reasons. In the Atlantic, in the Caribbean, in the Pacific, in the Indian Oceans, we know that there are lots of stakes there in terms of security, defense, in terms of the EU's clout and power at global level. This new geopolitical situation must be based for the EU on diplomacy and what I would call an environmental diplomacy. Diplomacy anchored in the preservation of those very commitments that we took in favor of biodiversity and climate. And in this geopolitical situation, in the framework of our EU diplomatic efforts, outermost regions have an immense role to play, because we're talking here about geographical areas where we have common interests with our neighboring countries. In the United Nations, in the General Assembly, the UNGA, you've got a lot of island states being represented. 1/3 of the members of the UN are island states. So we really need to make sure that our interests and the interests of outermost regions and the interests of these countries converge, because we are impacted by the same issues. The fact that we are in tropical areas, we are islands, we need to preserve our lagoons, we need to preserve our ecosystems and our biodiversity, our endemic biodiversity. And we know that the EU will not reach its biodiversity goals 2023-2030, nor its commitments in the framework of the global Kunming and Montreal Global Program or Framework Program without, of course, the help and without the involvement of these island regions and overseas and countries and territories. I would like to really thank the IUCN for organizing this meeting. Thank you to the mayor of Pointe-à-Pitre in particular, who is here. It's an honor to have you here among us, sir. I would like to greet all of you who are fighting the fight on a daily basis, defending your projects to defend biodiversity. This is really a civilization's stake here, and the EU must be a leader. It must be at the forefront of the defense of those objectives in order to defend biodiversity, to defend climate. More often than not, I regretted that in 1992, when we had the Rio conference, the Rio summit, well, we had drawn the conclusions of the climate protocol because many things happened afterwards, but we forgot the biodiversity protocol, something that I regret, that I've regretted very often. We're lagging behind. We need to make up for this delay. Now, I'm not talking only about the outermost regions, but if we see the situation is tragic, we are really accelerating the desertification of our areas. If we go on like this will be an absolute disaster in terms of biodiversity. Our outermost regions have an immense role to play to contribute to this European objective, but dare I say, this global objective of preserving our biodiversity, which gives outermost regions a lot more clout, and us in the EU more clout too, to replace these regions at the heart of the European debate. Now, we only have experts around this table, so I will not, of course, quote numbers that 80% of biodiversity of the Union are in the outermost regions. You know that. You know also all the difficulties that we have in front of us. You have El Niño, the increasing temperatures at global level. No, I will not go into that. You know all this. But let me focus perhaps on the history of a Best Life program. This BEST program is indeed the main program for the preservation and the conservation of biodiversity in outermost regions. And I want to go back to this history because, and I say this as Vice President of the European Parliament, because this allows me to say that the EP, the European Parliament, is indeed the main forum for progress for outermost regions. If you had to wait, and I don't mean anything mean when I say this, but if we had to wait for the Commission to come up with the best program, we would have had to wait a long time. In reality, this program was born here. It stems from this assembly, the European Parliament. But it also shows that there is a need to have a dialogue. This dialogue is very, very efficient. And a dialogue, when I talk of dialogue, I talk of the dialogue between you, the IUCN, and our Parliament. BEST program is indeed aligned with the message launched in 2008 under the French presidency of the EU, a message. For the first time, we structured the whole set of objectives for outermost regions in terms of biodiversity. We launched a message. It was in the island of La Réunion, and I like to defend this message sent in 2008 in La Réunion because I like La Réunion very much. And there was this conference with Jean-Philippe Palaisie, who at the time was the representative of IUCN here at the European Parliament. And together we convinced France and then Réunion to host the conference, which was a founding moment, really. It was a highlight. And because there was this event, because we launched that message, we started working, especially in the respective committees here in the EP, and we started to come up with this program. Now, this program was not born out of the blue because a long, long time ago, and let me then pay tribute to the Commission, there was the Nebium program for outermost regions, for the overseas countries and territories. This was the first program which was very targeted around biodiversity in the outermost regions, and it had worked quite well, and then it had been forgotten. And so we put on the table back then this BEST program, And from our point of view, this is a program that needs to be extended, but not only, it needs to be consolidated, it needs to be expanded and enlarged. The new best outermost region OR program 2017 was very interesting because it integrated indeed a lot of sensitive areas from an environmental point of view in the French regions. Why had we asked this? Because in the outermost regions, Natura 2000 does not apply. So the main tool of the EU for knowledge gathering of fauna and flora species here in Europe, well, that program does not exist in the outermost regions where we have 80% of the EU's biodiversity. So we could ask ourselves, why? Why does Natura 2000 not apply in the outermost regions? Why? Well, it did not apply because there was some form of consensus between the different stakeholders in the outermost regions and the European Commission and member states, on the other hand. And the understanding was that such a program should not be applied to the outermost regions because it was not best adapted to the outermost regions. And that's where the Article 349 comes into play. Article 349 allows us now to come up with a specific program, best outermost region, best OR, which is really adapted to our realities. But what we really want is to make sure that best outermost regions should be as important as Natura 2000 for the European continent or the metropolitan area, so to speak. So as to fulfill the objectives while taking into account our specificities and the need to adapt the program to local realities. We need to extend the duration of this program. The Best Life 2030 program covering both the OCTs and the outermost regions on the 6 continents of the world. Now, to go back to what Paolo was saying, I would say that today the fight to be led is also a budget fight or a budget discussion. We are right now negotiating the multi-annual framework plan or multi-annual budget framework rather. Now we are of course discussing with the European Commission. The Commission has come up with proposals on the environment, on life in particular. And to be honest, right now it doesn't look good. So how to make sure that we come up with a good budget out of these negotiations, we don't know yet. But be assured that the European Parliament will defend a strong mandate, a strong position for the Best Life program, and more generally, all those funds for the preservation and conservation of nature and the environment. And what I wanted to add is that, of course, in the last mandate, we were able to make progress, but to be honest, now there is a question mark on the sustainability of this progress. When we started negotiating the FRD funds and more globally or more generally the cohesion funds, the European Parliament introduced a principle, the do no harm principle, do no harm to the environment, of course. Secondly, in our negotiations or the negotiations that I was chairing, we asked that 30% of the FRD funds be allocated to biodiversity and climate actions. Now, this was considerable progress because the European Parliament said at that time that the cohesion funds had become much greener than, for instance, the common agricultural policy. We're still waiting to see if it's going to green this common agricultural policy. But as far as the cohesion funds, they had been greened. And today we have a restructuring of the budget with a certain number of common rules that disappeared. And nobody knows if indeed in this new renationalization of European funds, those priorities will indeed survive. So we need to monitor the situation, but of course, the European Parliament will go on defending these principles. And to go back to what I was saying at the beginning of my intervention, I just wanted to say that you've got, of course, the outermost regions, but you also have the OCTs, the overseas countries and territories, and then you've got the European islands on the issues of biodiversity, but also on the issues of climate and climate change. We need to really think globally, more globally, and think of perhaps one outermost region, one European outermost region, because there are lots of interactions here at play. And of course, this means that it's very important. It's very important to make differences between the different jurisdictions in order to have access to funds. But when we talk about actions to safeguard and to preserve biodiversity, to make sure that biodiversity is preserved, then we need to think more generally. That's it. Thank you very much for your attention.
Très, très bien. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Vice-Président.
Thank you so much, Vice President.
Also very important commitments, and to recall us all the origin of the Best Life programs, and even the environmental targets that we have also in cohesion and other European policies. Thank you so much. And now, before I pass the floor to Tommaso De Masi, I would like also to reiterate my great thank for all of you for coming here, and also especially also for our speakers that comes from several parts of the world, in this case from Europe, just from the Indian Ocean, Saint-Martin, Funchal, Madeira, a lot of course, European Commission, and all of you that are going to participate here on this debate. Thank you so much. It is listening what you say, listening what your experiences are, listen what you demand for the future, that we can do better and best policies here at the European Parliament. So thank you so much. Now I pass the floor to Tommaso De Masi, that is going to have the important role of leading all of this choreography this afternoon. Thank you so much, Tommaso.
Thank you, honorable MEPs, Mr. Vice President. It's really an honor for us to be here and in the Parliament. And we noted how BEST started, and it's rooted in democracy, and we're in the House of Democracy. And for our IUCN side, it's also rooted in democracy because it's anchored in one of the resolutions that our members, 1,500 of them, have voted upon our Congress. And I don't think I need to explain in length what IUCN is, but it's the International Union for Conservation of Nature. And we have both government members, civil society organization, indigenous people organization, subnational authorities that are part of our union. And our role as the Secretariat, which I'm proud to represent, is to bring all of these voices around the table. So it's also very nice to have this setting, or sort of like a circular setting in this room rather than a presentation, because that's really a dialogue that we want to bring from the institutions that are presented here, from the partners on the ground that make this possible, and also from the experience around the world that we will listen them. So thank you for that. As you mentioned, BEST is this event, and the entire initiative is rooted in a process that takes different steps, and it's important to recognize the moment in which we are now. this event particularly comes after the conference in Aruba, where there were important commitments regarding the overseas territories. It comes at a time where we finally have a strategy for island and communities and insular communities, which is really important. And it looks also beyond. As you mentioned, there's importance for the European Union as a whole to portray this leadership and this diplomacy, this green diplomacy, through the instrument that it has. And it was very nice to hear the support for the LIFE program, for Natura 2000, and the different, let's say, articulation of it, which is much needed at the moment. But to the war, so we know that this is a year with 3 COPs, with 3 convention of the parties. There will be also the UN Water Conference after. It's important to see that this is a message that will be carried throughout, and particularly for the one on biodiversity, but also for the other ones, it's important that the voices from the island are not seen as peripheries, but are seen as leaders. And this is exactly what this event aims to do. So as I mentioned, I'm from IUCN European Regional Office. I'm the biodiversity policy officer working here. But I think that it's best that I give the floor to the actual change makers on the ground. And I'm not exaggerating, but they're really changing the world. So I'm happy to give the floor to Laetitia Favre, Sabrine Brismeur, and Joao Miguel Gouveia Nunes, that are connected online. Good morning for some of you, good afternoon for others. And I pass on the floor to you to hear from you the challenges on the ground that you have, how you overcome them, and especially how it's important that funding mechanism like Best Life 2030 allow you to continue your work, and the fact that it's a secured long-term funding, how does it affect your work on the ground? So over to you. And just a technical note, we have interpretation if needed for the people around the table. So there's the headphones there.
Good afternoon, good morning. I think we can change the slide so everybody can follow along. Great, thank you. Honorable members, distinguished representatives, dear partners, thank you very much for the opportunity to present to you today. My name is Sabrine Brismeur, and I have the great honor of leading the Voices from the Territories presentation today. Across the globe, as discussed earlier, the EU's outermost regions and overseas countries and territories harbor a disproportionately high level of biodiversity compared to their metropolitan states, and are estimated to account for more than 80% of Europe's biodiversity. Their diverse flora and fauna, much of it unique to these regions, form incredible ecosystems that directly and intimately support the livelihoods and well-being of local economies and cultures. But this biodiversity is under severe threat. At the front lines of this crisis are local conservationists who are working to turn the tide on globally declining environmental conditions, often with the support of EU-funded programs like Best Life 2030. Together, our experiences demonstrate how locally led conservation is contributing to the implementation of the EU Biodiversity Strategy for 2030 and the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, while highlighting why continued investment will be essential for the next multi-annual financial framework. Today, a few of these impacted environmental practitioners are pleased to share our experiences with you from our work in the Caribbean, Micronesia, and the Indian Ocean. Next slide, please. But first, for a bit of context regarding what we do and what challenges we face in doing this work. I think you can change the slide. The 3 speakers today represent local nonprofits, consulting agencies, and governmental bodies working to protect biodiversity on our islands. Conservation practitioners like ourselves do this by building locally relevant projects for critical issues, linking them to economic and cultural empowerment, and very importantly, working with, not against, our local stakeholders. Next slide. Our institutions are faced with a variety of complex, interlinked, and ever-evolving environmental challenges shared by countries all over the world. These include things like ecosystem destruction, largely linked to supporting tourism-oriented economies in some parts of the world. For example, where I work on St. Martin, fewer than 22 hectares of mangrove wetlands remain, with 2 of the 4 species approaching local extinction. Most of these incredibly sensitive wetlands have been built over or dredged out for marinas, hotels, or other infrastructure. In addition, real or suspected species overexploitation, particularly for marine species, is an ongoing threat, as well as climate change-induced impacts, which our small territories have no mitigative control over, and invasive species and grazing pressures on already degraded habitats. Next slide. Unsurprisingly, sociopolitical challenges have significant implications for the scope, timeline, budget, and success of our projects and the conservation field as a whole. Biodiversity initiatives can be difficult to advance alongside immediate policy pressures. For example, as I learned in Mayotte, 1/3 of the population lacks access to running water, and those who do have access face water outages approximately half the time. 2/3 lack access to sanitation facilities. So while the issue of aquatic biodiversity is urgent, it can sometimes be harder to justify and is often overlooked in favor of other pressing critical issues at hand. In addition, competing demands on limited land and marine resources require careful balancing. Linkages between environmental health and community well-being are not always apparent, and policy frameworks and enforcement capacity must evolve, with scope to strengthen implementation at the national level. Next slide. Thank you. And finally, the institutional challenges we collectively face. Bureaucratic complexities create challenges in coordination, funding access, and policy implementation. Data must be strengthened in ecosystem and species monitoring programs. For example, in Madeira and the Canary Islands, limited information on breeding colonies and the species distribution at sea initially made it difficult to identify priority conservation areas and effectively plan future monitoring and management actions. Frequently, activities may also be constrained or limited by reliance on donor or project-based funding, and capacity constraints and workforce retention remain ongoing challenges in small island contexts. We know that programs like Best Life 2030 can't solve all our problems. Relying solely on project-based funding is unsustainable. Outermost regions and overseas countries and territories need structural and open funding to support long-term conservation initiatives that respond to local needs. You can go to next. Yes, thank you. But they are essential to helping us reach our goals. Best Life 2030 plays a key role in protecting biodiversity globally. Its focuses, inclusion, and flexibility allow us to conduct really valuable work when financial instruments can't be provided sustainably, when projects are deemed too ambitious for solely local support, or when existing institutions are already juggling too many tasks. With what I hope is some understanding about the significant challenges we face in mind, we are excited to share a little bit about our projects with you all now. These 3 projects are just a small selection from more than 50 locally led conservation initiatives, supported currently through the Best Life 2030 program across Europe's overseas regions and territories. From habitat restoration to scientific monitoring and community engagement. These projects allow for nimble, innovative, and targeted focuses. They encourage us to explore unknown and sometimes long overdue sectors of our work and develop creative and collaborative solutions in response and in a local context with scientifically sound and often deeply personal results. Next slide, please. On the island of St. Martin in the Caribbean, I lead a project dedicated to establishing a foundation for conservation success of our marine and coastal areas, particularly for our sharks and rays. Despite being critical to a balanced marine ecosystem, these species are globally under threat from overfishing and habitat degradation. St. Martin's waters are no exception. Through our Best Life 2030 project, MENA, we developed an initiative that collects essential data on our understudied artisanal fishery and works closely with fishers to improve conservation outcomes for sensitive shark and ray species. This is the kind of long-term partnership needed to strengthen the effective management of marine biodiversity and enable locals to deliver the EU's biodiversity objectives. I come from a family on French Saint Martin that has been prominent in the maritime sector for decades. As a child, I frequently accompanied my father on recreational fishing trips for snapper, tuna, lobster, and whatnot. But the artisanal fishery was not something that I knew much about. And frankly, neither did my organization, the nonprofit Nature Foundation St. Martin, despite our role as a leading marine conservation institution on the island. Conservation and fisheries are often seen as being at odds with one another, and relationships can be particularly tense in Caribbean island contexts, where some conservation efforts can reasonably leave people feeling like nature is being protected from them rather than for them. When I joined my NGO in 2023, we didn't necessarily have a bad relationship with fishers, but we didn't have a relationship with them at all. For years, our local fishers have been engaged repeatedly by agents from governments, nonprofits, consultancies, private companies, with what amounted to no tangible benefits for them. And this has understandably eroded their trust and willingness to cooperate with decision makers, especially in such a politically sensitive sector like conservation. This is an enormous disadvantage for both parties. On an island as small as ours, individual negative actions can quickly accumulate into significant impacts, whether that means a shark taken from a protected reef or a fisher who walks away feeling dismissed. So through our Best Life 2030 project, my team and I set out to change the status quo and build a real relationship for the benefit of everyone involved. The centerpiece of our project was a program linking collaborative educational workshops with direct livelihood support for artisanal fishers. In exchange for helping us develop our program and participating in workshops in marine conservation and sustainable fisheries, fishers received up to $1,500 US in essential goods and services. We helped one fisher find and install a boat winch to place his fish traps in deeper waters, which allowed him to target varied species and move away from the overexploited shallow reefs where parrotfish are regularly harvested. Another chose a replacement pump for his boat, whose failing equipment was directly threatening his income and livelihood. During these workshops, fishers received locally customized 3D printed measurement gauges for lobster and conch, fish identification resources, and descending devices to release undersized catch. All tools we have since seen them using in the field. We worked together to understand what a sustainable fishery could look like for St. Martin. We found common ground on difficult and sometimes divisive topics. And most importantly, we found a way to communicate with one another, even when we disagreed, and we will disagree. In the coming weeks, our project will roll out a second round of workshops for more fishers tied to fishery monitoring that will generate the critical baseline data we need for effective conservation and management going forward. Next slide, please. Thank you. This group of fishers now knows that we are serious about supporting them in their livelihoods. They know that we have immense respect for what it takes to fish and for the knowledge that they carry. They know that though we will not always agree, we ultimately want the same outcomes: abundant marine life in a healthy sea. And now we can begin working towards that together through marine park management, fisheries legislation, and public education. This kind of work takes an extraordinary amount of time, trust, and transparency between all parties. Mindset shifts do not immediately translate to behavioral change, but we must start somewhere, and this is it. Best Life 2030 gave us the means to start building this critically important relationship with what we anticipate will be real and lasting benefits for marine biodiversity down the line. Thank you very much, and I pass it on to my colleague, Leticia.
Thank you. My name is Laetitia Fèvre, and I work on the island of Mayotte, where I lead the Restore project, a restoration initiative focused on the freshwater rivers that are home to Cotylophus rubripinis, a fish species found nowhere else on Earth outside the Comoros archipelago. Mayotte rivers are under serious pressure. More than 330 barriers interrupt the natural flow. Domestic uses continuously degrade water quality, and widespread illegal water extraction leaves stretches of river too shallow and sluggish to sustain aquatic life at all. Please, can you change slide? Okay. Again, please. The second for me. Okay, thank you. The Restore project works on two fronts at the same time. The first is restoring habitat quality across 3 watersheds through river cleanups carried out in the partnership with social reintegration NGOs. Awareness campaigns reaching local communities, elected officials and school children, training local organizations in biodiversity and habitat monitoring, and targeted action against illegal water extraction. The second is measuring whether it is working by tracking populations of Cotylophus rubripinis and other native fish and crustaceans, as well as monitoring how the spawning grounds respond over time. The real challenge of this project was bringing together local organizations from the social sector, community members, local authorities, and scientific experts, all towards the common goal of long-term biodiversity conservation. But during my last field visit in June, on the Gouloué River, I realized that challenge had been partially met. Ali, 20, participated in a rock study program with our partner NGO, Mayotte Nature Environnement. He was responsible for waste and logjam cleanup sessions, and that day Ali was diligently measuring the river's flow rate with a current meter, assessing whether the removals his team had carried out were yet improving water circulation. Marcelina, 11, lived in the Banga, the informal settlement, just beside the river. She was examining larvae caught in plankton nets under a magnifying glass. She hasn't missed a single one of our 4 monitoring sessions. She told me that if the river is cleaner today, it's partly because of her and the 80 other eco-delegates from her middle school who have been coming to clean it every month, ever since she went back and told her teacher what we were doing. We have risen to the challenge thanks to a young volunteer who found us after seeing our work on television. Thanks to local organizations independently raising funds to continue what we started, and thanks to their ongoing support for environmental monitoring on other rivers in Mayotte. Restocor is making visible progress, but our work is not finished. It is still too early to say whether these actions have truly led to the recovery of Cotylopus rubripinis populations. They remain highly vulnerable along with the broader biodiversity and the rivers we all depend on. Next slide. Restoring freshwater ecosystems takes time. Flexible, long-term investment is therefore essential if Europe is to meet its restoration ambitions. These joint efforts in restoration, awareness raising, and scientific monitoring must be sustained. The condition of our waterways continues to deteriorate in the face of growing pressures on the territory. The impact of habitat restoration and awareness raising can only be measured over the medium to long term, 5 to 10 years. That is the true nature of ecology recovery. Biodiversity and water resource protection must become genuine priorities for the region, backed by the financial, human, and technical resources needed to see them succeed. Initiatives like Restocor deserve greater support from local governments and authorities, and programs like Best Life 2030 are essential in helping us showcase the value of these conservation projects to our regional decision makers. Thank you.
Joao, I think you might be muted.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Letita. My name is João Nunes and I coordinate the Mac Finch project at the Ecological Park of Funchal on Madeira Island that is managed by the Funchal City Council. Our project focuses on the conservation of the Max shearwater, a seabird that breeds in Madeira and the Canary Islands and remains one of the least known seabirds in our region. Next slide, please. When we started this project, one of our biggest challenges was surprisingly simple. We didn't know enough. Important breeding areas remained undiscovered, and the threats these birds face were poorly understood. Without this knowledge, it is difficult to protect a species effectively. Best Life 2030 gave us the opportunity to change that. Over the last few months, the teams in Madeira and Canary Islands have worked together to better understand these species. In Madeira, we monitored remote valleys and searched for breeding areas in difficult terrain. And the colleagues in Canaries identified several new potential breeding areas and began mapping how these birds move across the region. By sharing methods, experience, and knowledge across islands, we have been able to achieve much more than any of us have achieved alone. What we discovered exceeded our expectations, and what we found is already informing management decisions and laying the foundation for long-term conservation of this species in Micronesia. But what I value most about this species is not the specific, or about this project is not the specific results. It's the collaboration that made those results possible. We brought people and institutions together, filled critical knowledge gaps, and created foundations for long-term conservation. Public authorities like NGOs, schools, volunteers, private companies, and local stakeholders all contributed to a common goal. This is what locally led conservation looks like in practice. Projects like this, Mac Finish, demonstrate that target investment creates lasting impact when it supports local expertise, cooperation, and commitment. We are delivering meaningful outcomes for biodiversity, strengthening cooperation across territories, and creating benefits for both nature and society. At the same time, our experience has made one thing clear: conservation is not a one-time effort. Without continued support, the knowledge gaps we have begun to close will remain unresolved. Important breeding areas could remain unprotected, and the momentum built through this collaboration could be lost. Long-term conservation requires long-term commitment and long-term funding. Next slide, please. Please, can you click the slide to start the video, please? If I had the opportunity to share one message with the European Union decision makers, it would be simple. Don't forget the islands. Island regions may be small and remote, but they are home to extraordinary biodiversity and unique ecosystems that form an irreplaceable part of Europe's natural heritage. Island regions safeguard biodiversity of global importance. Continue European Union investment through programs such as Best Life 2030 enables local organizations to generate knowledge, partnerships, long-term management that is needed to protect this ecosystem for future generations. Continued investment in biodiversity action in island regions through programs like Best Life 2030 is not only an investment in nature, it's an investment in people, cooperation, resilience, and the future of our natural heritage. Thank you very much. Now we'll pass to Sabrina.
Thank you. You can change the slide. You can change it one more time. One more time, please. Thank you. We are reaching the end of our presentation, and it is no secret that global biodiversity faces significant pressures. But we hope that the handful of examples of Best Life 2030 projects discussed today help showcase that local actors continue to deliver meaningful, involved, and foundational results on the ground. We represent what effective, locally led conservation really looks like, not just as a concept, but as a proven practice, which has been and will continue to deliver results for Europe's biodiversity commitments in the long term. As we've emphasized today, conservation initiatives like ours take time and relationships to develop, implement, monitor, and produce results. The sorts of outcomes we are working for may function in the time span of years, decades, or even longer. Earth takes time to heal, even with assistance. But this vital work cannot begin without immediate funding and long-term backing. We cannot deliver tomorrow's results without today's support. Our natural world depends on it. Next slide, please. Thank you all very much for your time and attention. We remain open to any questions or comments you may have through our institutional emails. And again, we thank you sincerely for the opportunity. Thank you to all of the participants as well.
Thank you very much, Sabrine, Joao, and Leticia for this. I think it's really important, especially here in Brussels, to remember, to remind ourselves that actions is carried out by people on the ground. So the personal component of these stories is really important. And sometimes it might be the lack of common understanding from the get-go, or the need for positive messages that echo and that carry more people to work on conservations. But as Joao was mentioning, conservation is an ongoing effort, and it's not to be it's to be seen over long-term periods. So thank you for that. We're now going to move to the panel discussions, where we have different level of administrations and that are going to join us and share their insights. We are slightly beyond times, but I believe that hearing from the actual case studies on the ground is really important. So I'm going to ask you to keep it relatively short if you can. And I'm going to start with the European Commission and DG Environment. We have with us Alexandra Bacrou. She's the head of unit for the Green Knowledge and Research Hub and Life unit. So we heard that conservation works. We know that by now there's evidence to support it, but sometimes showcasing it or linking it to actual long-term mechanisms for conservation is challenging. In your opinion, what insights from life can be carried forwards in the future, and especially linked to the capacity building and implementation aspect of it?
Thank you. And I have to say that the three presentations were really inspirational, because exactly we can see what can happen on the ground involving the local people, the community, the different levels of governance there, and building the networks and the governance that really can effectively find a local solution tailored to the needs, implement it, and deliver. For us, the best is one of the best things that happens to life. And I think that we have to thank the Parliament for that, because everything started as some preparatory actions, and then a project, and let's take some money to experiment in one territory. Then next year, a little bit of more money to experiment in Azores. Then a little bit of money to do this. So we had a generation after generation of best projects that it did not stop only to the overseas territories and countries, but we also have a best belt for mainland Europe countries, which is also another nice project. And it was such a commotion on the ground that in the previous and the current MFF running, but in the life the last program that we have committed, after the evaluation of these preparatory actions and pilot projects, to make best mainstream. And we came up with the best life. And we can see now that it is not only 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 experiments. It has turned out to be 50 programs on the ground, 50 projects in the ground, and really everyone with its own, addressing its own needs, addressing the local conditions, bringing the local people, and building ownership of the conservation objective. And I think particularly it is what makes the program working effectively. The program is loved by the people. It is implemented with very good results. And also for us, it provides a kind of laboratory experimenting with these ideas, but then bringing back to the policymaker a reassurance that this thing that it has been created, it is working. And this is very important when you have also to report back and to say that European money produces some European value. This is the very important thing. But now for the OCTs and that, I find out, and it has been exposed by the 3 examples that we see, how the program builds capacities on the ground, how it can exchange best practices, because last week also I was in another meeting bringing also 2 other projects who are benefiting from Best Life 2030, sending their experiences from Brazil and from Saint Pierre Miquelon, which is somewhere close to Greenland, to Canada, not Greenland. Yeah, sorry. Have not yet. Sorry. Sorry. So, okay, I stay corrected and apologies. So that is really what we are getting out of BEST, and this is the message that we are carrying out. We will try to come back. We have come back with life actions. As you know, life will not exist as an independent project, but we have managed to put life actions in the European Competitiveness Fund. And we strongly believe, and we try to demonstrate, that biodiversity also can bring a competitive advantage, can help sustain economy, can help us sustain our communities. And it is also very clear there that the OCTs are eligible under the ACF. So there we have a pool that something can be created, something can be come out. And while Best Life, it is valid for up to 2030, we have put also some more resources. I think that we need to look forward to create the opportunity to have already from 2028, maybe starting from 2029, a new continuation of the Best Life for the period after 2030, but of course starting kicking off under the new MFF, of course the new conditions that the new programming period will bring. And let's hope for the best. That's what I want to say.
Thank you, Alexandra. And I think that best being the best thing for life might be a palpable new motto for the further iteration. We move on to Ms. Aurélie Godefroy. She's the Deputy Head of Unit for all overseas countries and territories at DG INPA. And we heard about this global dimension and the knowledge exchange that can, let's say, cross-pollinate between different projects. So what is, in your opinion, the role of DG INPA in advancing this agenda, and how can project like this one be useful for that?
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure for me to be here for this very important event. So very quickly, it's a big thank to the organizer for bringing us all together. This is very important. Of course, it has been said that, of course, OCTs host a very rich biodiversity, including very extensive maritime areas. At the same time, it has been said as well, they're really vulnerable to climate change and to environmental degradation. And so they are critical for the European Union agenda on biodiversity and climate. What I wanted to say first is 2 words of introduction. So in my unit, we deal with the 13 OCTs, and our relation is framed by something called the Decision on Overseas Association, including Greenland. So it's called the DOAC. And with this DOAC, we have a framework for our political relation, for our trade relation, and for the cooperation. And for the cooperation, we have a budget, which is about 500 million euro for this current period. So how do we tackle the green transition or green agenda? Mainly through our dialogue, of course, but through our programs. And we have different types of programs. We have bilateral programs for the OCTs, we have regional programs, and we have one global program. And most of those programs have the green agenda at their heart. So either as a specific objective, so biodiversity being the first target, or as a cross-cutting issue, for example, tackling sectors that are critical either for climate or for biodiversity. And here I think you would all agree, of course, it's very important to tackle biodiversity conservation, but we also need to look at the drivers of biodiversity loss. So sustainable agriculture, I mean, of course, unsustainable tourism, which is a key issue, water management, pollution, invasive species. So all those issues that are actually at the heart of the biodiversity agenda as well. So just to maybe give you a few examples, we have, for example, programs on water in Bonaire, Curaçao, in French Polynesia, and those programs have actually biodiversity components. We deal quite a lot with sustainable agriculture for the reasons I explained as a driver of biodiversity loss, and we have programs, for example, in Synthestatius, but also 2 new regional programs that we are starting on food systems, sustainable food systems, and on the natural capital. And in these programs, for example, we want to work on sargassum, which is an important issue as well for the Caribbean region. We have a green overseas program that has been really focusing on on-demand support for OCTs on fostering the green transition, also with support for issues such as coastal erosion, water management, sustainable agriculture. And as I mentioned, specific programs that just target biodiversity, for example, in the French TAF, with some programs to target invasive species. So really looking at some other drivers of biodiversity loss. So that's quite, of course, a comprehensive work that we are doing, but I would like to mention indeed the complementarity with Best Life, because it's really something that strikes me, how what we are doing hand in hand with the government, mainly with budget support, is complementary to what has been done through the Best Life programs. Because what my colleague just said is actually the beauty of the program is really to work with local communities, to work on empowerment, to work on ownership, raising awareness, engaging with the local communities. And this is critical to bring the change. A colleague mentioned it, it takes a lot of time to work with nature and also to work with people, actually. So this is a very good recipe for success, really engaging with the local communities. In my current position, I experienced some of those programs already with very positive feedback from the local communities and high visibility on the ground, be it, for example, what you do in Greenland to empower local population to monitor themselves, biodiversity, be it coral restoration that you've been doing, for example, in Aruba, or some more. So you have a mix of pilot programs and more structural program that really look at long-term change. So for example, in the Caribbean, looking at how we can better collect data on ocean ecosystems related issues, do some special planning, and really empower the capacity in the long term for people to continue the cooperation. So this is really what I wanted to insist on, is the complementarity with what we do and the Best Life programs. Looking at the future, you know that the Commission has proposed an amended DOAC. So we propose to double the amount of money that will go to OCTs. So this is positive. And we will see, of course, those instruments are still under negotiation by the Council. The instrument has to be adopted by unanimity. And we hope that once it's ready, we can start, of course, working on the programming. It's a bit too early now to look at exactly the sectors and how this will be organized, but of course we will need to continue looking at the interlinkages between the economic development, socio-economic development, and the impact on nature. The new things, of course, on the agenda for us in DG INPA is the fact that we are now integrating OCTs into our Global Gateway agenda with the new toolbox, so meaning that now there will be more opportunity for OCTs to attract additional finance from private sector, from development banks. And here into this more investment-related agenda, we need to find the hooks to mainstream biodiversity, look at nature-based solutions, for example, that are really promising, continue to engage, for example, on issues such as sustainable tourism, which bring, of course, local benefits, but needs to be done in a way that it can be sustainable. So again, thank you so much for the opportunity to be present here. We very much look forward to continue the cooperation with you, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Aurélie. And for the participants, we will have a networking reception after, so they will be able to ask you questions there. Apologies for the ones online, but I'm sure that we can make it up in another moment. We move on now to Mr. Gus Schuetjes, apologist, 6 years in the Netherlands. My pronunciation is still not perfect, but he's the policy coordinator of the Caribbean team, the Director General for Nature and Fisheries at the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries, Food Quality and Nature of the Netherlands. So I wanted to ask you, since you are directly involved also from the national scale and the national government, what is, in your opinion, the added value of funding projects like Best Life 2030, and how, in the current moment that we are in the negotiations, can the member states really ensure that this long-term secure funding is embedded into the discussions? I know it's a tough question, but
I know. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me to the meeting. Let me start with, first of all, with the first part of your question is what is the added value? I think I did this job 10 years ago as well. It was also the BEST program was also an operational program that we liked a lot as a central government, simply because it's also a grassroots funding mechanism to start all kinds of initiatives that we perhaps don't see or think are too small, at least in those days, and still that is. I think if you look at the added value it has right now, that is that the program itself is funding small projects, but we are, if we see the added value from a national perspective, we try to co-finance it, and we try to expand them or extrapolate them as well to other areas or other islands. I think it's also, first of all, you have the program itself, which is funding all kinds of initiatives, but I think it's also a community of people, actually. So we are all engaged in nature management, right, for the OCTs. And I think it's really important that we meet as well in order to be stronger together. That's on a policy level or an NGO level. I think that's also a part of the added value of the program itself. Related to your second part of your question, is related to how can you make it last? I wrote all kinds of text actually here to answer to your question, but the thing is actually it's quite difficult, because I think it's there is a discussion going on with MFF, right? How do we continue after 2030 regarding the structural funding of the EU? And I think that the BEST program is financed via LIFE. And I know that my government, for example, has a certain opinion about MFF. And I think all the member states have their own opinion about it, and determining eventually the funding that will be available for LIFE. That's also for LIFE BEST. So my guess would be is that the new legislation that you are trying to provide for the OCTs relates to the funding, the increase of funding from 500 million to 1 billion. I think there would be more future in that to invest in that, rather than to see if the MFF still has somewhere an opportunity to keep on funding LIFE BEST. And it would be an option, I think. But I think for the member states itself, so for my ministry, for example, I think that a dual strategy would be advisable, actually. There's another part is that we always think about nature conservation as being a public good, and therefore it has to be publicly financed. I think also we have to think about how we tweak this with the commercial sector as well. So how do we develop mechanisms that will help us in the future to be more sustainable, even after the public financing has stopped? So there are some mechanisms for that as well. As you know, I think we also have to continue with that part.
thank you for that. And indeed, it's we are in a moment in which it's a community effort. So it's not only one country, one institutions, or one individual. We're at the moment where we all recognize the need for biodiversity, the fact that it underpins European competitiveness, that it underpins our economies, and that we need to move together towards that joint objective, be it in different ways, public, private, or other mechanisms. And on the issue of community, we have online Kate Brown, which is the Executive Director of the Global Island Partnership, GLISPA, and of the Island Biodiversity Coalition. IUCN is a member of this coalition. And I wanted to ask you, how do you see that this alliance and this community that you have there can amplify the messages that come out of BEST 2030? And how can BEST Life 2030 supports the vision that the coalition you represent puts forward?
Thank you so much. And I just wanted to also recognize the three amazing examples that we heard earlier. I actually was involved years ago with the former member of the European Parliament, Maurice Ponga from New Caledonia, in the development phase of BEST, I think back in 2009, 2010. And it's really amazing to see really concrete examples of what some of the islands and local organizations are doing as a result of this funding. In our coalition and in the Global Island Partnership, we were started to really help islands work together regardless of political status on advancing conservation and sustainable livelihoods. And I think what I can see just in some senses in the island space, we often islands are defined by size and, smallness. And I think what we're trying to do is bring the multitude of islands together in our coalition to kind of advance some of the issues that we've been talking about. And I think the really big push from this coalition is on this growing recognition of islands as both essential to achieving the global biodiversity framework and other biodiversity and climate goals, but also as places with solutions. And I think whether it's independent countries that are islands or islands of Europe or OCTs and outermost regions, we see many of these examples on a regular basis. And our job in the coalition and working together with IUCN and our partners is to try and work together to amplify that and to share some of those things to, in a sense, create a global movement that ensures that islands are actually able to participate, bring the solutions, but also help shape what's going on at the global level. And we hope to see that at the upcoming CBD COP in Armenia later this year. And I think there was real recognition of this important role of islands in the Convention on Biodiversity, in particular with the program of work on island biodiversity, and the recognition that islands have common issues regardless of their political status. And I think those are the things that we're trying to advance together with our partners, with the islands that we work with, as we look towards how to create that movement within the global community. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Kate. And I don't know if you hear the applauses online, but all of your presentation received resounding applause for the room. So thank you for that. Now, last but not least, we have here with us Harry Durimel. He's the mayor of Pointe-à-Pitre and the premier vice-president de Cap-Excellence de Guadeloupe. Thank you so much for joining us here and for being part of this event. I wanted to ask you, what is your experience with the BEST Life 2030 program, and also how local initiatives on the ground and in the your daily relations with citizens, how that impacts the work that you do?
Oh, yeah. I can answer in French.
Oui, bien sûr. Désolé.
Yes.
Yes, well, thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. First and foremost, before I answer your question, I want to thank the representatives of IUCN and also the EBCD, and as well as the OFP for the invitation. And I would like to, the OFP, sorry, for the invitation. And thank you to the European Parliament, since we are here. This is a possibility for us to tell you about our local reality. We're talking about biodiversity, but for us, this is our daily life. It's about water. It's about life on our islands. So thanks to Julienne of IUCN. Well, we really wanted to make sure that we were present here. We indeed launched a cooperation project, what we call the local points, Pointe-à-Pitre, and we gave it a Creole name. So the local point, the nursery of the Caribbean. This is how we called it. This allowed us to call the nursery that allowed us to restore the DNA, the vegetal DNA of Pointe-à-Pitre as a city. We were able to collect, indeed, seeds. We had seedlings, bushes that we were able to replant on a surface of around 3,000 square meters next to an international museum, which we call the Memorial Act, dedicated to the history of slavery in our countries. So we had a cultural heritage then. We wanted to add an environmental heritage token. So this is an action that has become, a local authority tool for vegetal nursery. So we were able to reproduce native species that are under threat, that are threatened of extinction, and also our local agents then really learn how to take care of local species, and they learn also new techniques for trimming, for instance, the bushes. This was also a training spaces. Pupils came together, associations, visitors were involved in the project. This allowed us to really then come up with let's say a local catalog of the local plants, their use, their names, things that we see on a daily basis, but we don't know exactly what they are, that we don't know the definitions, what they do. So we created the nursery, and the city is indeed the owner of 18 hectares of primary woods that had been abandoned, primary forest. So we had the nursery, and then we expanded to this forest. So we produce the seedlings in this forest, and then we go back to Pointe-à-Pitre. Pointe-à-Pitre is a very small city, 2.5, 2.6 square kilometers. It's like your living room in your homes here in Brussels, I'm sure. So we could really, really do something for this city. It's a very beautiful city, but unfortunately, because we don't have a lot of space, we took away the land. We put a lot of concrete, unfortunately. So we're very much exposed to the winds because we're on the coast. And we're very much exposed to climate change, to the rising waters, for instance. So this action seemed to us a very, very timely one. There is a but, I have to say, now that when we, for instance, plant the seedlings, the seeds, we have around there buildings. And you've got people living there. This is social housing units. And the people living there are people that are very vulnerable. They don't have a lot of means. And they looked at us in a weird way. You know, I am well known as being an environmentalist. I became a mayor of Pointe-à-Pitre in 2020, but I've been active in policy since for 30 years. For 30 years, I'm a lawyer. I was also an activist where I was really fighting against soil pollution. Now I'm a mayor. So now I'm in politics. You know, when I was 30 years ago, a young environmentalist, I was a falcon. And so the local population was telling me, you're there, you, the environmentalist, you're watering your plants, but we haven't had water for 3 days. This is important. I need to tell the European Parliament we have 100 liters of water at the source, and only 30% or 30 liters go to the faucets. And we've got 3 days, for instance, of a shutdown on water in schools because you have no water in schools for 3 days. People in the neighborhoods don't have water 3 days a week because we don't have a sustainable water source. I hope France is telling everyone, because we need help in order to restore our water resources. This is a question of biodiversity. We cannot waste water resources because we indeed put back into into nature, into just the environment, water. 90% of our water resources, and also the people living there, all the wastewater indeed is just being wasted there. Nobody sees what to do with it. We see people, we see the used waters that are not being treated. We don't have water treatment plants, and these untreated waters, of course, are creating lots of environmental damage. Now, it's very beautiful, of course, to create nurseries, to have primary woods, etc. But in order to sustain that, we'll need water, we'll need engineering, we'll need support in the longer term. So we want to make sure that Best Life is expanded, is sustained. Because we need indeed time. It's one thing to plant seeds, but we need to make sure that we monitor things in the longer run. We need to make things sustainable. So I hope Best Life will not disappear. We hope it will be expanded. This is not just a question of the Antilles, of the Caribbean. It's a community stake. And it is my hope as mayor of Pointe-à-Pitre that we come up with a global sustainable solution up to the task to take up the social, economic, and environmental challenges we are faced in our territories. Of course, we need to respect the specificities of our territories, but we also need to leverage the assets of our communities. This is what gives sense to Europe, to make this EU a common union. So, of course, I'll stay there. I wanted to just say this is an absolutely beautiful project, but it's very fragile, and the citizens that are looking at us have difficulties owning it, because while we're there creating our nurturing, well, they don't have water. Water is the main challenge, whether it's drinkable water or not. It is a major challenge, and I think that we all are aware of it in IUCN, in the OFP, in the European Parliament. Let's act together. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup pour ce mot. Et
Thank you so much for what you just said.
Lopez Aguilar joining us for some remarks. And it's great to see that different political groups and political families come together under like the same idea of putting forward biodiversity and this issue of overseas territories. So, Honorable MEP, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I hope it's fine in English, because actually I had some notes in English, but yesterday I was part of a debate with some other MEPs in French in a TV, an émission de TV. But actually I was willing to share with you as an MEP born and residing in an outermost region, some words of welcoming to all of you to this round table of discussion and shared concern about some key elements of the prospects of what we have at sight, the political battle to be fought on the proposal of next multi-annual financial framework, 2028-2034, and its impact on regions, on regional policy, and particularly with regions with singularity, outermost regions, and what we might call overseas territories. There is a combination of very specific, unique regional situations all across the landscape of the diversity, which is under EU law, but some of them, as it is the case of outermost regions, of course, do also have a very unique legal basis, which is Article 349 of the Functioning of the European Union. That should mean a lot when it comes to standing up and getting the goal achieved, getting the goal done. So it's making it certain that we are to protect the singularity of regions, certain regions, and the diversity of those regions and the uniqueness of those regions, even the strenuous circumstances that have been imposed by the so-called change of paradigm, which is the founding battlefield, the change of paradigm for the next multi-annual financial framework. And that, of course, that affects the survival of the LIFE program, which is absolutely essential, playing a very central role in mainstreaming the EU environmental objectives and commitments. Well, we have an experience under the LIFE program so far, high quality support for nature conservation, diversity, restoration, climate adaptation, pollution prevention, environmental governance, and numbers, figures, which is nothing less than 300.39 billion euros in the current prices under the multi-annual financial framework. So to ensure predictability, stability, continuity of funding, which is absolutely essential. But overseas regions and outermost regions are too an integral part of the EU. They are part of the EU in every possible way. They are not aloof, despite the uniqueness of the fragmented insularity of their territories. They are not segmented from the umbrella of EU law. They are an integral part of EU law, and that also has to make sense when it comes to biodiversity protection, environmental objectives, and European solidarity with these territories. Of course, we are committed. And we have combined forces. I am a Spaniard. I am a member of the Eastern group. But in that regard, it doesn't make a real difference when it comes to joining forces with men and women belonging to some other groups or coming from some member states, French, Portugal, the Netherlands, which also has overseas territories. If we can actually be influential within our groups in order to make sure that within the EU biodiversity strategy for 2030, it'll be specifically highlighted the need to protect and restore ecosystems. And that makes an impact on fisheries, forestry, agriculture, depending on biodiversity, but also on tourism. It has also to do with biodiversity, for sure. I come from the Canaries. Biodiversity is absolutely essential. Of course, tourism is the main industry, but still, tourism has to do with the protection of biodiversity. It could change dramatically if the biodiversity loses ground, umbrella, EU funding, or protection. So this LIFE program and the strategy for 2030 have to be part of a battle ahead. And finally, sure that you will share with me that Best Life 2030, which is biodiversity and ecosystem services in territories of European overseas, is a granting mechanism to preserve and restoring biodiversity in both outermost regions and overseas countries and territories facing significant climate change related threats. For sure, we're seeing that as we speak. Climate change on the move as we speak. It's so obvious. So specific goals, including this biodiversity conversation, fostering the sustainable ecosystem services, integrating conservation, local decision making, are part of the strategy that we're sharing hand by hand, working together, members of the European Parliament, in order to reach that goal, to achieve that goal, and make it clear when it comes to the final definition of the multi-annual financial framework. You know that as it was presented by the European Commission, the alarms were raised. Didn't look good. But as we have insisted and joined forces and shown unity in making that point, it seems to be moving in some other direction. Hopefully it will be changed, but it won't be easy. There has to be a sequence. The good news is that it takes a majority in the European Parliament, and it takes many of us being influential in order to shape that majority, and it takes unanimity in the Council. So it only suffices one to prevent the wrongdoing from happening, to prevent it, to actually make it impossible. So we only hope that political will accompany the reasoning that certainly we're sharing around this round table. I'm only happy to share these few minutes in an agenda in which, as we do in the European Parliament, we wear many hats every day. Many hats every day. I've been devoted to fundamental rights, liberty, justice, and home affairs for years. I've chaired that committee for 10 years now. I'm the spokesperson for constitutional affairs, but still I wear my hat as a Canadian. And believe me, that as a Canadian, that is a hat I am happy to wear, and I wear the most. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable MEP. I think that your messages echoes what we heard before and what we heard for the people in this room. Now, I'm very conscious of time, and I'm really sorry about this, but I would like to give the floors to parts of the IUCN families that are here in the French and Dutch national committees, but of course, first also to the French Biodiversity Agency, which is a co-founder and long-standing partner. If you were to sum up in one key message for each of you, how can Best Life be replicated in different sectors? How can we secure this kind of funding? And how can we make sure that this initiative continues? What would you say? So, Mr. Saboua, we'll see you.
Thanks a lot. Le programme BEST a été déployé.
Thank you so much. The BEST program was deployed in many areas, and the specificity of the program can be explained by several elements. We are working with the French and Dutch committee of the IUCN. They are able to accompany communities within the territories. The knowledge of the stakeholders can help us structure the program, and our program is a tool which can help us organize the work in a complex way. And we needed to support what donors can do. We needed to answer to the needs of the local communities. And because of that, we must ensure that the project holders can be helped. And our program must be a stepping stone to give life to new projects and initiatives. Thank you so much.
I'm sort of repeating what has been said by many of the speakers, but I think the key essence for long-term impact post-funding is time, because I think we need the passion. I think the passion is there with those who implement the conservation action, but we also need to build the trust and respect and gain respect with the other people that live out in those landscapes, in those seascapes. So time is of essence. Coral reefs, we don't restore them overnight. It takes a decade, it takes a generation. Dry forest, same thing. So time is of an essence. We should allow conservation actors to be able to work with multi-year budget and not, 2-3 year budget. That is important for impact. It's also important for staff retainment. If you want a civil society to be strong and grow, you need to give people social security. So you need to be able to offer them longer term contracts. And then the second point, to keep it short, I think what a program like Life Best, or in fact any other conservation program, will need to spend time and money on is a budget line for advocacy. Because even with all the good science there, this does not automatically translate into good policies, and good policies do not automatically translate into the implementation of those policies. So I think we need good marketeers on board to basically translate our message to the investment sector and the public sector. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now we have Claude Desmond from the French National Committee. Over to you.
Merci. Merci pour cette question.
Thank you so much for your question. I think it is important to highlight the fact that Best Life 2030 is a program that trusts local stakeholders and actors. We could see it today with all the speakers, associations, SMEs, scientists, and local communities. They see how the environment is evolving, and they can see where species are, what are the threats on these species, and they know how things evolve on the ground. Unfortunately, all these associations are often little associations. They have reduced clout and power, and this makes the difference. BEST is not only a grant scheme for several projects, it can help project holders. And today, as a regional focal point with my colleagues, we wanted to tell them that we are there to translate projects into action and to meet the requirements of the EU. The EU has several requirements which are very high sometimes, and project holders sometimes do not know what these requirements mean. We try to support them along the life cycle of the projects when it comes to funding and technical aspects. And for years, we've been helping these people. So us, the French committee of the IUCN, notably in New Caledony, and we could see that within some organizations, we could help structures to answer to call of proposals. And that can be more ambitious projects such as LIFE, and to have many more donors. And I wanted to tell you something else. When you have human capital, it is important to have human capital for these projects, not only for project managers, but also for the people on the ground. And with programs such as Best Life, we can replicate actions and initiatives. And when it comes to the sustainability of the projects, this is a key point of the projects, and we always insist on the sustainability of actions and on the advocacy actions. The objective being to replicate the project. And I also wanted to insist on the fact that the scope is quite extended, and we can take into account the various requirements within the project. And what we can see today is that project holders very often ask us when the call for proposals will be launched, and there's a higher number of applicants for these projects. So the program flexibility is important for each and every region, and particularly in our region. And to conclude, we work with island states, very isolated island states, where reality is very different from one region to another. We need to keep the flexibility of the programs to take into account the specificities of the regions. Thank you so much.
Haven't heard from me, but I have the job of getting us out of this room because they're all waiting outside. So I'm Trevor Sandwith, and I'm the director of IUCN Center for Conservation Action, and this program vests in my center. I just want to say three quick things. First of all, thank you to the Parliament and all of those who made this happen from the very beginning. It was really fascinating to hear that story and how important it is to sustain this. Second point is really to celebrate what we heard. It's amazing when you hear peoples from the ground able to catalyze, make change happen, learn and grow. It's the plant that Puster said you were going to water, well, I think you said, the mayor, that was going to water and grow into the big tree. And then the third point really is about the future. We've heard about the funding future, but I think what is happening here is a demonstration of how biodiversity is so intricately connected to the social and development of our countries, our communities, of life on Earth. And from IUCN, we embrace that. We embrace this community that can work together to make that a reality. This is not about people and nature. We heard in the room that we are of the nature. Nature is of us. It's our life. So with that maybe thought in mind, think to the future that this argument that fundamentally mainstreaming nature into our social and economic future is the opportunity. It is also the challenge, and the solutions already lie within this community. We don't have to invent solutions. We just have to shine a light on them and water them to make them grow. So thank you to all of you. I don't have time to do the big round of thanks because they're going to evict us, but let's just give everyone a round of applause for this great event.